Dear friends, good morning and welcome to the last day of our retreat together. It feels a little bit sad to say that. I feel like we're just getting to know each other, and it would be wonderful to continue to practice together for another week or so. But this is the time that we have, and we can still make the most of every moment that we have today. The retreat's not over yet, so in this talk I hope to explore a sense of what is our vision, what is the Plum Village vision for, you could call it a theory of change. Everybody loves theories of change, right? You probably have a few already in your pocket. We're going to give you one more. In other retreats like this that we've done in North America and in Europe, actually we found that, okay, don't tell them this, but people were a little bit resistant to our theory of change. They were a little bit skeptical. And they had a tendency to ask, this is all very well. You know, we can sit and we can breathe and that's all very well. But what about systems change? You know, what about structural injustice? What does this have to do with that? Because I think in their minds, this, what we're doing here, didn't have anything to do with that. Collective action problems, the large-scale systemic injustices that we face. And we believe that this, what we're doing here, does have something to do with that. So I'm not exactly sure where each of you stands on that, how you feel about that, but I'm going to try to share a little bit about how we understand it. And I hope that it's clear that this is also a work in progress for us. It's not like something finished. We are learning from you all. We are learning from every one of these retreats that we do. We are trying to learn from the global situation in every moment and adapt and change as best we can. So, okay, open my little book. Some questions that you might have are, for example, how do we keep the energy of this retreat going in our lives and in our work? And what difference does it make? Does it make a difference? And then you might also get some questions when you go home from your loved ones or your colleagues. You know, they might ask you, so what did you do? You know, and maybe your colleagues, if they hear that you just walked slowly on a beach and sat and breathed, they might like, yeah, well, whilst we were working, you know, you owe us. You know, we were holding it all together whilst you were just going and having a nice time. So I hope maybe in the course of this session this morning, I can share some things that might answer some of those questions. And a bigger question I think all of us face is, what is being asked of us by these times? And we know that I think we're probably all people who have made a choice and continue to make that choice every day as best we can to not shy away from the reality, the changing reality, to not ignore the facts. And from my point of view, what I know about the situation is that the facts keep getting worse. The projections, the changes in temperature, in ice coverage, in ocean surface temperature, and so on. It's like the pace of change is also worse than we hoped. Everything's going faster. So what do we do in the face of that? Knowing that we are people who do not want to pretend and who don't want to try to tell ourselves a nice story just because that would be easier. So what is being asked of us? And what is the appropriate response? So we talk a lot about the energy of mindfulness, and I heard in our sharing circle that for one of you at least, and maybe for more, there had been a little bit of an aversion to going into the practice of mindfulness because it seemed too white. And I was really struck by that comment. And to be honest, it kind of made me a little bit sad because I felt like this is one of the harms that that capitalism is doing. In a way, we are all, to one extent or another, the products of a capitalist system. I know I am. And one of the things that capitalism does very well is to appropriate and to instrumentalize. And even the most beautiful offerings of humanity will be appropriated and instrumentalized. And I think for us in Plum Village, it's very important that our way of practicing, from its root to its leaf tips, has to be an active resistance to that appropriation and that instrumentalization. We cannot and will not accept the denaturalization of the practice of mindfulness. And so we want, in a sense, to distinguish ourselves from some corporate versions of mindfulness. And so part of what I want to do today is to point out the differences between what we are seeking to cultivate and develop, as opposed to how mindfulness has been captured, appropriated, instrumentalized, productified, and sold back to us. To the extent that maybe when it comes back to its roots, because here we are in the land of the roots of that practice, maybe, this whole region, from here to India, to China, to Vietnam, to Japan, to, pretty much any way you go, Thailand, we are in the land of the roots of this practice where it's been cultivated for centuries in, I believe, a very largely non-instrumentalized way and non-commodified way. But sometimes now, when it comes back to this land of its roots, it's no longer recognizable. it looks like, oh, here's another white corporate well-being product. So how do we distinguish ourselves from that? How do we make sure that we're not doing that? One of the keys, I think, is that we see the interbeing between the individual and the collective. So this is not an approach designed at individual well-being, or not individual well-being alone, because for us there is no individual in the deepest sense. We are all a reflection, a manifestation of the collective. And so individual transformation for us is collective transformation. Because we see in ourselves the echo and the reflection of the collective suffering. We are a part of Mother Earth. Mother Earth, and not a part as in a little cog in a machine, right? It's more like a hologram. We reflect and somehow even contain the entirety of the earth and indeed the entirety of the entire cosmos. So it's much more mysterious and not possible to express in a mechanistic way. One other thing is that we do our best not to be afraid of suffering. Our intent is not to try to remove suffering, even, which can sound strange. Because we know that suffering has something to teach us. We know that actually suffering is our fuel. This can appear contradictory because at some level we all want to reduce suffering and if possible completely remove it from the entire cosmos, from all living beings. So there are contradictions. There are contradictions, deep ones, in Buddhism, and we are unashamedly paradoxical. It's actually necessary. The paradoxes and the contradictions emerge because of the limitations of language. It's a reflection of our inability to express the nature of reality in language. Reality doesn't have any problem with contradictions, paradoxes. It's only us that have a problem when we try to simplify things and try to codify things. Okay, that's kind of the summary. Now we're going to go a little bit more into the detail. So our approach to suffering and in a sense to therapy or well-being or feeling better or being able to handle the challenges, knowing what to do and what not to do, is present moment based. So you probably have all encountered the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, which is, the first noble truth is, there is suffering. I think it's not very mysterious for most of us. There is suffering. We can confirm there is suffering. We've experienced suffering. We see suffering all around us. And the Buddha said that if we can understand the roots of suffering, how this suffering came to be, which is the second noble truth, the roots of suffering, then we have a chance to be liberated from suffering, which is the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, which is happiness, well-being. So we have suffering and we have the roots. The ingredients, what has produced suffering, how the suffering has come to be. And we have to remember that we are not in the business of assigning single causes to things. This is a common, habitual error of thinking, especially in the sort of Western industrialized type of education, that we look for single causes. What is the cause? In Buddhism, we're very careful to remember that there is never any single cause. Everything comes from multiple different causes. And I know when I first encountered this teaching, I had a tendency to think, to put this suffering as being largely caused by things that happened to me in the past. Like my suffering is the little wounds and shocks and things that I accumulated in my lifetime, things that didn't go well, injustices, bullying, abuse, or whatever it might be, in the past that I'm still reacting to now. So, and of course, the third noble truth, happiness, I had a tendency to put it in the future, right? Because I have to somehow heal all of the little hurts and my reaction to them, and then eventually, after some unspecified amount of time, then I'll feel better, and it'll all be fine. And the fourth noble truth is the path. It's the sort of the how-to. Right? How to do all of this on a daily basis. So that was the part that I thought was in the present. The happiness was in the future, suffering was in the past, and the roots of suffering were in the past. And it took me some time to realize that I think all of this was a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of the teaching. There may be things that have happened to us in the past that were hard, that were unjust, that were extremely painful. But our suffering, the only time that we can suffer is now. And the idea for me that I would have to go back and sort of revisit every single one of these little bumps and scrapes and figure them out and heal them, I had put it to myself one day, it's like, well, even if I could do that, even if I did go back and see myself as an 11-year-old child and understand what happened and heal that and come to peace with that and come to peace with what happened when I was 3 and every little moment and what happened yesterday and the day before, and you know, even if I could imagine that I had completely done all my homework, in the light of interbeing, I wouldn't be done, because I cannot be indifferent to the rest of reality, because I'm interconnected with it. And I know, like, a lot of my suffering, the pain I experience, is not my own. It's the feeling of pain, grief, sorrow, sometimes rage at the ongoing injustices that are happening daily for billions of people. So do I have to go and heal every one of those wounds as well, and then I'll be happy? But then what about, I don't know, other living beings, not just humans? Mother Earth herself, all the forests, all the destruction, all the death, and maybe not just on planet Earth, right? Maybe the entire cosmos. I have to go and figure out the suffering of the aliens too. This is going to take a long time. So that, I think that can't be it. That can't be what the Buddha meant, because the Buddha said this thing is possible now. Like it's hard to get to grips with just how radical that is. That the Buddha is saying it is possible to dwell happily in the present moment. So the only thing that can mean is that it's possible to be at peace in some sense, to be released from the suffering with the suffering. Not having resolved it. So that's very strange for me, because I really feel like I got to solve it. And then I'll be able to rest. But the Buddha said, no, it can only be now, because now is all we have. So if happiness is possible at all, it's now. And knowing what we know about now is very complicated business. It's really messed up. And the Buddha says, it's okay. You can still be at peace, you can still be happy with all of this. This is really weird, at least to me. I don't know about you, but for me this is like completely crazy. So, the only thing I can conclude from this reflection is that this is in the present. This is in the present. This is in the present. But this too must be in the present. There is something I am doing that is making me react with stress and with discomfort and pain and intolerance or, aversion, and I'm continuing to do that all the time. And that is what I have to understand. So this does not mean that we don't do anything about the systemic injustices, right? So I'm not saying that we don't address the historical dimension. Because this could look like, oh, now you're just going to bypass everything and you say everything's fine, you can be at peace with it and you don't have to do anything. No, that is not what we're saying. Remember, paradox, contradiction. There are two levels of truth, and we have to deal with both. So in the Buddhist tradition, we are taught that one way for our beings to experience reality is known as the historical truth, in which there is time, things are outside of each other, you are not me, I am not you. We have different histories, different backgrounds, different lives, different characteristics. Right? Thai would sometimes say the cow is not the ice cream, but now we're vegan, so we say the cashew nut is not the vegan ice cream. Everything is outside of everything else. So that's the historical truth. And at the time we see that we have the capacity to be in touch with the profound interrelatedness of all things, in which whenever we look deeply into any one thing, like Brother Treasure the other day took the example of the flower, and you look deeply into the flower, what do you find? You find sun, rain, wind, earth, soil, time, space, consciousness. You find everything. And if you take any aspect of that away, the flower will collapse. So the one contains the all. And I think in the core of every spiritual tradition is this understanding. The mystical heart of every tradition, there are people who have been in touch with this truth. And that includes the interbeing of the three times, that the present moment contains the entirety of the past of the cosmos. All of that past, since the non-beginning, has given rise to precisely this moment, and so in some way this moment is a kind of hologram of that entire past. And this moment also is the ground, is the is what will produce the entirety of the future of the cosmos. So in this moment are the seeds of the whole future unfolding of the cosmos. This is what we call the interbeing of the three times. So the challenge with any Buddhist teaching is to understand whether it is being offered at the level of the historical truth or the ultimate truth, or sometimes, confusingly, both. Right? So this, in a sense, is one of the both, potentially. It can be understood at the level of the historical truth. It is worth doing some work understanding the hurts we experienced as children, as young adults, and soothing that and doing that work. I'm not for a moment saying that that's not worthwhile. Right? It might have sounded like that before, but that's not really the case. That's also important work. We need to understand ourselves, we need to understand our histories. That is healing in the historical dimension. But we also have to see that there is there's the possibility to transcend the historical dimension. To be free in the present, in a kind of unconditioned way. And this really is also about the nature of agency. What is actually within my capacity to do something about? And we find this also in many traditions, in the Stoic tradition. You know, this very, very important question, and Christiana also asked it the other day. Like, what is the thing that I can actually do something about? And primarily, I would suggest that it is my way of seeing, my view. So I can't really do anything about what happened to me in the past. It's in the past. I can't change it. But my way of understanding it, my way of seeing it, I can change. My way of relating to it. That is actually in the present moment. And that goes very deep. Because it has to do with what I think I am. And one of the deepest roots of our suffering is the belief that we are separate. That we are a separate self. So that is actually, I think, one of the deepest roots. Part of a fundamental aspect of the second noble truth is the belief that I am a separate self, and that is something that I am unconsciously nourishing and perpetuating in the present moment. So there I have agency. I can examine my mostly unquestioned belief in my separateness, and I may be able to start to release it or soften it. And it's very important to point out that we may intellectually understand the notion of interdependence. Intellectually, in a sense, it's not very difficult. Right? It's fairly straightforward to see that everything depends on everything else. But having that intellectual understanding is not the same as living it as a truth in our felt experience, in our embodied experience. So the path of training that we offer is actually aimed at gradually dissolving that notion of separateness. And it's very practical. This is something that we can do little by little every day, in every moment. So we have a path. We have a path of training. And we know that it starts with stopping. It's funny to say that. It starts with stopping. And we have lots of ways to stop. And what are we stopping? We are stopping our discursive, non-stop thinking. The kind of little blah, 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 blah narration of every moment that just tends to happen. So we notice that blah blah tends to have a slightly anxious quality. At least I notice that it does for me. I notice that if I let that continue constantly, there are some identifiable characteristics of that constant narration. It's usually in terms of self. That it seems to be very concerned about how I come across, whether I'm liked or disliked, understood, misunderstood, threatened or safe, successful or failing. It worries about having said the wrong thing in the past, not saying the right thing in the future, things I haven't done, things I still have to do, the to-do list, all of that stuff. It's very kind of worried about protecting the notion of this entity. And there are lots of things in the world, in our current way of life, that will tend to reinforce that notion of name, of identity. You have an identity card, you have a passport, you have a bio, you have to send your bio every time you give a podcast or a talk or you have to send you a photo. This is who I am, this is my name, these are the things I've done, this is why I'm so great. And, So we constantly, unfortunately, led to reinforce this. It's like building a sandcastle, and then the tide kind of sweeps it away. And if we actually look carefully at the evidence, we find that the sand of that castle is actually connected to the sand of the whole beach. It's just notionally we separate ourselves and we say, I am me, but we have deep roots that connect us to our ancestors, genetic, spiritual, land, human, non-human. We're not really separate, and yet that idea of that separate entity is constantly reified, constantly reinforced. So we have lots and lots and lots of little techniques, little ways to stop that narration, because we know that narration has something to do with the perpetuation of this notion of separateness, because it's telling the story about us as a separate self. And if we can actually stop that blah blah, it's quite surprising what happens. So in a sense, there's a part of us which is terrified of truly stopping that internal discourse, because we're so closely identified with it. But the surprising discovery is that when it does stop, we don't die, we don't disappear in a puff of smoke. In fact, we may have a chance to discover who we truly are in the deep silence. And it's much more beautiful than we think. So we use the sound of the bell to stop. We use sensations in the body, the contact of our feet with the ground, the sensation of the breath coming in and out. Remember yesterday I said Tai offered us this golden key. If you want to stop your thinking, just feel. It's very surprising that when we just direct our attention towards our feeling and we train that a little bit and we are able to sustain that in a concentrated way, that little voice of narration is silent when we are concentrated on feeling. And our body has a lot to teach us. It has a very, very deep intelligence. Every single one of our cells is living into being. Our cells can't do it any other way. Right? They are all constantly in this flow of interdependence and resonance. They can't survive on their own. It's just that we have a kind of mental notion of our separateness, but our cells are completely free of that. And we can learn from them. Our body already knows the secret of interbeing. It's living it all the time. And the more that we can relearn to be an embodied consciousness and have the capacity to silence the narration, the more we can experience that interbeing directly. So we have bells, we have walking meditation. The reason I'm saying this is to illustrate a little bit that these practices are not just to feel a little bit better. Of course, it feels wonderful to walk on the beach, and that is part of the purpose. But we're also doing this deeper work. At the very deepest work is kind of dissolving the notion of separation. So I'm trying to draw the line, the connection between what appear to be quite simple practices and these very, very deep kind of metaphysical level truths. Although in Buddhism we don't really get into metaphysics much, if we're careful. We have stopping, which can lead to deep rest. And again, lots of ways to do that. We have the body scans, the lying down meditation. All of this you can take with you. You can put it in your pocket. You can integrate this into your daily life. Maybe you don't have a beach to walk on every morning, but you probably do have to walk from your apartment to the underground or to the car park or to your office, or even if you work from home, you have to walk from the bedroom to the living room or to the bathroom. Every step can become a moment of non-thinking. Every step can be made in freedom. Every step can be a moment of deep embodiment, of feeling, not thinking. When we're able to stop and to rest in that way, we can care for what is arising in our consciousness, and we can listen. We can listen deeply to ourselves. It's as though in every moment we have a kind of inclination of mind, a kind of attitude, a tendency maybe to be a little bit on the negative side, a little bit on the exhausted side, a little bit on the irritable side or reactive. It could also be a tendency to be optimistic or joyful. But it's very good to know what is my underlying attitude to this moment, the inclination of my mind, and can I bring my mindfulness to it. So that means just to recognize, I see that there's a little bit of tension accumulated in my jaw. I am a little bit of the fighting attitude, no matter what. No matter what the situation is. I fight against myself, I fight against others in conversation, I fight against the news, I fight against reality. I wish it were otherwise. So this is not to take the fight out of us, right? This is not with the aim of sitting around doing nothing. This is with the understanding that we don't want to make the situation worse. So we want to, at a very deep level, reject violence in all its forms. We believe that there is a way to engage with the situation which is non-violent. We're also not dogmatic about that. It's subtle, it's complicated. There are extreme situations when non-violence becomes violence. So it doesn't mean that there is no situation in which we would take up arms. But it means that we will exhaust every possibility to avoid violence before taking that last resort. So the teaching is profoundly non-dogmatic. So whatever I say, or whatever we say, is not absolute. There are always exceptions. So part of the stopping, the resting, the caring, and the listening is also allowing ourselves to be in nature. To allow Mother Earth to care for us as well. To release ourselves into the embrace of life, into the embrace of the present moment, into the embrace of Mother Earth. So this is all just kind of summary of what we've done so far. If you could imagine a big arrow from here, going over here, this all comes under, in a sense, the heading of what we call right mindfulness, which is one element of the Noble Eightfold Path. And that's the fourth noble truth, the path. So the path, when you go into it, it has 8 aspects. And you can actually start anywhere. I'm going to start with mindfulness. And here I want to take a little time to distinguish our style of mindfulness from the corporate well-being mindfulness. Maybe you could call it mindfulness. So the concern about the way that mindfulness has been appropriated by corporate culture is that it could be used to make our intolerable lifestyles slightly more tolerable, so that we can continue to be exploited by these giant piles of money that are intent on making themselves into even more giant piles of money, which are the big corporations. Right? So it could be that the corporation that you work for says, hey, go and do some mindfulness, you'll feel better, you'll be more creative, be more innovative, you'll make more money for us. And if you can have better communications in your teams, and great, increase the bottom line. Carry on. So there could be a sense in which mindfulness can be used to make an intolerable and unjust system slightly more tolerable, to keep it going a little bit longer. We're not into that. That's not what we do, even though we do offer mindfulness in corporations, some corporations. But we are very clear that we will only do it if we are allowed to give the full teaching. So for us, it's very important that mindfulness is one part of the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes ethics. we will never separate the practice of mindfulness from ethics. So as long as we are allowed to be ourselves, that we are not censored, we are not told what to teach and what not to teach, we are happy to come into pretty much any space and offer the teaching, but it has to be the complete teaching. We will never water it down. Because we also trust in the power of a seed, a good seed, well planted. So when you plant the seed of mindfulness in somebody's consciousness, in fact, it's not like you really have to plant it, it's already there. Maybe you just water it a little bit. We all have mindfulness. We all have the capacity to be aware of what is going on inside and around us. But that capacity can be developed, it can be trained. And so that could be seen as watering the seed of mindfulness. And we trust that when we do that, when we develop our capacity to pay attention to what is going on in the present moment, in us and around us, what happens is good. It does good things, because what do we become aware of? Suffering. And we are naturally and fundamentally averse to suffering, to our own and to the suffering of others. So when you cultivate mindfulness, you also cultivate empathy. And actually you cultivate bodhicitta, you cultivate the will to relieve the suffering of others, to make the situation better. For me, one of the reasons that we can do terrible things is because we can numb ourselves. We can make ourselves numb to the consequences of our actions. And in fact, a lot of our education is set up to do exactly that, to make us as numb as possible, and sometimes quite explicitly so. So it was well known that in the First World War, most soldiers, when told to fire, would fire into the air. Nobody wants to kill another person. You have to be trained. If you have an untrained conscript, they will not kill somebody. They'll fire in the air. I think it was something like 90% of all the shots were fired in the air. And slowly the armies learned that they needed to train people to become more brutal, to become more indifferent, to become more numb, and more distanced also. If it's just a button press, it's much easier, sadly. So the sort of the corollary to that is that if we train sensitivity, feeling, not thinking, then we are also going to be training the sensitivity to suffering and a kind of ethical sensitivity. Mindfulness, when it's deep enough, is already the ground of ethics, of ethical behavior. And something I noticed is that sometimes mindfulness in the corporate sense is presented as something quite neutral and a little bit clinical, kind of as though it's like a laboratory experiment. You just observe neutrally, without judgment, and so on. And then I compare with the way that our teacher taught us mindfulness, and he never talked about mindfulness in those terms. When our teacher spoke about mindfulness, it was always with a sense of wonder, with a sense of mystery, with a sense of awe. He would say that in every breath taken in mindfulness, every single breath taken in full awareness is healing already now. And that can be really, really hard to believe when we're suffering. Especially when we believe that we have a right to suffer, that we are the legitimate victim of a situation. I know I have been extremely resistant to to my teacher telling me, this breath, this moment is healing already. Every step is healing. My response to that is, no way. It's not enough. You're not taking into account the complexity of my situation and my circumstances and what happened. How are you giving me something so stupid and simple? How is that ever going to work? I got to have something like psychological, something complicated. You know? This is not complicated enough. It's not personal enough. You're giving the same thing to everyone. How's that going to work? But you could hear in the sound of his voice the conviction based on his own experience of healing. He said, you can heal yourself with walking meditation alone. And at a very dark point in my life, I took refuge in just that phrase. I felt like I had nothing else to hold on to, but that was like a rope in a stormy ocean. I could just hold on to that notion. And I would do walking meditation all day long, because it was the only way I could avoid drowning in the turmoil of my own mind. And it needed a little bit of faith. Right? In secular mindfulness, they will not use the word faith because that is not acceptable, right, in the materialist worldview. Faith isn't real, it's something suspect. Right? But Thai would always use the word faith. It took me, I was very skeptical, very difficult for me to take this on. Like, I don't do faith. I don't know what that is. Some religious woo-woo stuff. Right? I like evidence, don't give me faith. But what I realized is, like, to allow myself the possibility of healing, I did have to take a leap of faith. I had to allow at least that I did not know. I had to allow for the possibility that I don't know that this can't heal me. Right? Does that make sense? At least I know the negative. I know that I have no evidence that this won't work. Right? So if I'm really honest in my scientific attitude, I have to acknowledge that I don't know for sure that it's not healing. That was the little tiny foothold for me that I could build my faith on. It was actually skepticism. Right? A skepticism about the extent of my own knowledge. And that allowed me to say, well, Thai is somebody I trust. I see the way he lives. I think I can trust him more than I trust myself, actually. I know, I let myself down. And I've really tried to see if he's going to let me down. I've really tried to find the flaw, the crack. I'm constantly kind of looking out of the corner of my eye. Yeah. He's not doing that all day long. No way, come on. I don't believe that. Nobody's like that. And yet, try as I might, I could never catch him. So at some point I had to say, well, if he says that this is possible, then at least I have to try. I have to honestly try. And that means I have to suspend my disbelief, I have to suspend my doubt, and I have to allow that this step could heal me. This step could heal me. This step is healing. This breath is healing already. But Thai would push us even further. He would challenge me by saying that the energy of mindfulness is holy, is sacred in itself. And he would draw a parallel between the way that the Holy Spirit is understood in Christianity and the energy of mindfulness. And this was even harder for me because, the first thing I did as a child was reject Christianity. And yet I cannot deny that I have deep Christian roots, centuries back. But I was trying to cut myself off from those roots and say I have nothing to do with that. I am a product of scientific rationalism, whatever. And then Tai would say these things. He said the energy of mindfulness is like to the energy of the Holy Spirit. This is really strange to me. Because I could kind of take mindfulness is kind of like a faculty, right? It's a property of my mind. It's some self-reflective ability of my mind to look at its own activity, as if that makes any sense. As if we even know what consciousness is, right? And we delude ourselves with this all the time. Certainly neuroscientists do. We pretend that, that's established. We know, we have a brain and neuronal activity gives rise to consciousness, and then we have faculties, like you could probably locate it to the right prefrontal cortex, that it's like, here's this little bit of brain that lights up every time somebody practices mindfulness. So, done, explained, simple. I could kind of cope with that level of explanation, but at the same time I wasn't really satisfied with it. And I noticed that every time Tai talked about mindfulness, it had this immensity to it. It had this sense of mystery. It had this feeling that it's not something that's yours. It's something that you can tap into, that you can cultivate, that you can allow to grow within you, but it's not yours. You didn't produce it. You didn't make it. It's more mysterious than that. And it is the embodiment of love. Mindfulness is not neutral. It's loving. It's tender. It embraces with tenderness everything it touches. Not like a cold, analytical gaze. It's infinitely tender, like a loving mother embracing her child. And it was clear somehow that every time Tai spoke about it, he was talking about something immense, beyond rational understanding. And I don't know exactly what the Holy Spirit is, right? Or the energy of the Holy Spirit is. But what I do know is that it can't be something small. And it can't be something that I made up in my head. If it's real, then it is something immense and transpersonal, cosmic, universal. So I think what Tai was doing was making use of, for some of us, our Christian roots, to say, don't limit your understanding of mindfulness to a kind of neuroscientific, psychological, conceptual understanding. You have to allow for the possibility that it is something unlimited and mysterious. And the same goes for the present moment. Do you think that you have touched the present moment? Do you think that you know what it is to dwell in the present moment? When I ask myself that question, my answer is kind of, well, a little bit, sometimes. But I leave it a little bit mysterious. I allow for the possibility that I can go even deeper, that I haven't reached the bottom, and that there is no bottom, that I can keep sinking deeper into the present moment, into the wonder and the mystery. at the heart of the present moment. And one thing I can say with certainty is that I have never found an end to that. It seems to be truly limitless. So we speak about an awakened way of living. Right? This is not the same as downloading a mindfulness app and on your way to work whilst you're rushing, to get the kids their breakfast and do all the things you have to do, and kind of listening to something in the background whilst you're doing everything else, and then saying, I've checked off my 10 minutes, I've done my breaths. That's not it. We have to give it our whole attention. It's not something that we can do whilst multitasking. In fact, we like to retrain ourselves in monotasking. So when we brush our teeth, just brush our teeth. Mindfulness of toothbrushing. And we can smile. And it becomes very pleasant. But sometimes it's hard to resist the temptation to listen to another podcast, to do something else whilst we're brushing our teeth, to get it out of the way so that we can get back to our work or whatever else we think that we're going to cram in before we go to sleep. So inherent in this path of awakened living, this awakened way of living, is a fundamental act of resistance. We are saying no. We are saying no to the rushing, to the striving, to the endless feeling of not enough. I'm not enough. I don't have enough. I need more. I need to be more. We are saying no to that. Every time we allow ourselves to return to the present moment. And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of determination. It is not easy, which is also why we need each other. We need to remind each other. So mindfulness carries within it the potential for concentration. When mindfulness is sustained, it becomes concentrated. And we call it right concentration because it is possible to concentrate on the wrong kinds of things. So mindfulness, when we cultivate it, when we develop it, it becomes very powerful. It can illuminate many, many things. We also have a practice called right diligence. It's a kind of what are we doing and what are we not doing? And it's sometimes called right effort, because we do have a tendency to strive at everything and to try to maximize everything, even mindfulness. So this is a way to measure and to kind of test, like, okay, what is the quality of my effort, of my striving, of my diligence, and is it right, or is it helpful or unhelpful? So this right diligence is further subdivided. Buddhism can be very analytical, lots of nice lists. So I'm going to put right diligence back over here. So it breaks down, you can think of it as sort of caring for the present moment. How do we take care of whatever is coming up in the present moment? We heard from Sister Training the other day that we have all of these seeds in our store consciousness. The seed of anger, the seed of blame, the seed of hatred, but also the seed of compassion, the seed of forgiveness, the seed of love, the seed of equanimity. And so right diligence is, in a sense, it's like how to be a good gardener of your mind. So we want to know how to handle a feeling of suffering or a painful feeling, feeling of suffering, and we want to know how to generate what we call the wholesome or the positive mental formations. A positive MF. Okay? So this is really, really important in every moment. These are the kind of two fundamental skills. How to handle the painful feelings when they arise, and how to know how to self-generate a feeling of well-being, of resting, of peace, of happiness. Because if we can do that, if we can generate our own happiness, then we're also resisting consumerism. So we don't need to consume more to cover up the unpleasant feeling and to generate a temporary feeling of well-being. We're no longer reliant on these transitory experiences of consumption to cope. So this breaks down, taking care of the feeling of suffering. There's two situations, broadly. One is when the feeling of suffering is already present in our mind. So the seed has been touched by some kind of circumstance, it's come up, it's flowered, we are angry. What do? We need to know how to recognize it, how to apply and how to call on the seed of mindfulness to embrace that unpleasant feeling. And we know that the energy of mindfulness is a little bit like the light of the sun. You don't have to do much. The sunlight doesn't need to come and mess with the flower to get it to open in the morning. It just shines on it and the flower opens. The energy of mindfulness is the same. When we can bathe our anger in this loving, tender energy of awareness, right, which might be as simple as saying, hello, hello my anger, I know you're there. It's okay. You can be there as long as you want. We're not suppressing our anger, we're not trying to force it back into the box. We are acknowledging it, recognizing it, saying hello with love and care. And if we can do that, our anger will be soothed. So this is not something to, don't take my word for it. You have to test this in your own experience. See if it works. And for me, I had to, it's not just the what, but the how. Right? It's not just like, okay, now I'm embracing my anger, I'm aware of my anger, I'm aware of my anger, I'm aware, okay. Why isn't it going to bed? Why isn't it going back to sleep? If I look at that, I say, okay, maybe not quite enough tenderness. And so in the quality of my mindfulness, there has to be patience, there has to be tolerance, there has to be tenderness, there has to be love. When those qualities are present, the mental formations respond. I used to say that all our mental formations love music. And the best kind of music is the breath. The music of following our in-breath and our out-breath. And our mental formations love listening to that. They're very happy. They calm right down. So we have a capacity to soothe ourselves. So this is taking care when a painful feeling has been triggered, when it is present in our consciousness, we embrace it with a lot of love, help it go back to sleep. So that's when it's present. And when it's absent, we are very careful about what kind of things we consume, because everything needs food to survive, including our anger, our mental formations. So there are some kinds of food, including our own thinking, which can be toxic to us. Right? The will to revenge, or the will to punish, is something that we can rehearse. You know, if we've been hurt and we think about that, and we think about, like, gotta get that guy back, gotta get him back, it's not fair, you know. We can feed that, and it can become very strong. So we can be the cause, we can actually be watering the seed of anger and inviting it up. So we want to be a skillful gardener and know which kinds of seeds we want to water. This is Sister Trinim already shared, the practice of selective watering. We want to know how to generate a positive mental formation. So again, there's two situations. Either it is already present, or it is absent. If a positive mental formation, like compassion, is already present, it's like having a very good friend who's come to tea, and you want them to stay as long as possible. So you keep offering them tea, and maybe some cookies, and nice conversation, and your company, and maybe they like to stay in the living room of your mind. So this is also about how we consume. How am I nourishing my own positive mental formations? Am I helping them to stay present, active in my mind for a long time? And if they're not present, if the seed of compassion has not been touched in my consciousness, do I know how to call on it, how to bring it up? So our teacher used to talk about the mechanism of compassion. We spoke a little bit about this in the grief and loss workshop, and this can be a little bit counterintuitive, because this is where we actually learn how to make good use of the suffering. So what we observe is that if we are in touch with suffering in the right way, compassion is the natural response. So it means, for example, if I remember the pain that I've experienced in my life, I have to be very careful not to feed the victim narrative. Right? So it's not, woe is me, why did this happen to me, it's unfair, it's unjust, it shouldn't have happened, I don't like it, make it stop, make it go away. That doesn't work, that doesn't bring up compassion. But if I am able to bring again this loving, tender energy of mindfulness to my pain, to the painful things that happen to me, compassion flows. It's like filling a dry well. It just floods. And then I can also widen the circle of my awareness to include my loved ones, to include those around me who I know are suffering. And again, if I bring to mind their pain, the immediate response is compassion. And I can go even further, and I can bring to mind the pain and the suffering of the world. I remember the people who are living under bombs, falling bombs and missiles and collapsing buildings, the people who don't have enough to eat, the people who don't have clean water to drink, the people who are living under dictatorships and repression. All the many kinds of injustice that are now in our world, human and more than human. And again, if I can be in touch with that pain without being overwhelmed by it, so I need to be stable enough, then compassion is born. I may also want to be able to generate a feeling of joy. I don't know if you remember Phap said in his talk that Thai had introduced this mantra, "This is a happy moment." And he said, one of our monastics really hated this. That was me. I was so allergic to this mantra because I felt like I don't like enforced joy. Don't just tell me I have to be happy. I have a right to suffer. You can't just tell me to be happy. That's like abuse or something. I don't know. I was very reactive. My boundaries. Don't tell me to be happy. I hadn't understood what he meant. He didn't mean ignore the suffering. He didn't mean pretend that everything's fine and pretend that nothing is, painful. He meant whilst standing in a full awareness of the real situation, which includes a lot of suffering, we have to cultivate our capacity to still see the wonder, to still feel boundless joy. Because that is also part of the kind of response that we want to have to the pain, to the suffering. We don't want to bring more pain to pain. Right? When we go into action in the historical dimension, we want to bring the flavor of the ultimate. We want to bring the flavor of freedom, of liberation to every action that we make in the historical dimension. That will make us a different kind of activist. So how do we do that? I struggled with this for a really long time. Of course, so there's many, many different ways. So one is just make a list of all the conditions that you have in your life right now that are conditions for well-being. So one might be just having enough to eat. So he would often invoke this mantra at the time of a meal, and we'd look at our plate and go, well, actually, it is kind of a miracle to have food. I should be able to be happy just because I have a bowl of food. It's really interesting to notice, like, I'm still angry, and I can't appreciate the simple miracle of this food, which of course is not simple at all. It's also the acknowledging the mystery and the wonder and the presence of the entire cosmos. It's also being able to look deeply into that leaf of lettuce and see in that bright, fresh green the light of the sun. So if I can just pause my victim narrative for a moment and just see again with fresh eyes the colors, the forms, the deeply interconnected, mysterious nature of this food, the gift and the miracle of it, I may have a chance to get in touch with a moment of gratitude, which can lead to joy. It can also be just recognizing that we are in reasonably good health. And maybe it's not perfect, but we appreciate what we have. Just appreciating the ability to still be able to walk for those of us who can. The ability to see for those of us who can, to hear for those of us who can. So we can list many, many things, and it's worth doing as homework. Just take a piece of paper and write down all the conditions for happiness that you have in your life right now. Your loved ones, your friends, the people who support you, the people who are there for you when you're in pain. We are so much more rich than we realize. But then we can also go a little further in that exploration of how to touch the seed of joy or the seed of peace. And what I've found is that we can actually use our imagination. So we might have a tendency to think that when we imagine something, we are conjuring up something that isn't real. Usually it's like, imagine a flying hippopotamus or something. And it's not exactly what I mean. So actually, I find that I can imagine boundless joy. I can imagine how it would feel to be filled with a radiant joy. And the funny thing is, the moment that I imagine it, I'm actually feeling it. Isn't it strange? Imagination is not exactly what we think. It might actually be the act of touching a seed in our store consciousness. I can imagine peace. I can imagine how it would feel to be completely free from any worry. And the moment that I imagine that, I feel it. So we need to train that a little bit, train that capacity to call on these beautiful seeds that we do have as part of our birthright. They are present in us. We may have neglected them a little bit, but they are there, and they can be, we can learn to call on them. Sometimes it can be enough also just to have a memory, because one of the strange things about our brain is that it doesn't really distinguish between remembering something that happened and actually experiencing it. Now, that can be one of the harder aspects of trauma. Right? When you remember the bad thing that happened to you, it's almost as if you're experiencing it again in the present moment. But the same is true with joy. Right? For me, I just have to remember the experience of listening to the final chorus of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and it's there. The joy is there. But a moment ago it wasn't there. So that is a skill that we can cultivate. Maybe it's a memory from childhood. You know? Maybe it's a memory with a friend, a moment of wonder. You can call on it in your darkest moments. Not to ignore the suffering, but to help you embrace it. Okay. So, I promised our team that I would give everyone a little break. I have a very bad reputation for giving talks that are too long, and all my brothers and sisters get very upset. At least they tease me a lot. So I suggest that we have a little bathroom break, have a cup of tea, take a little stretch, and maybe, what should we say? I think 10? 15? 10? Okay, Joanna says 10. So that means 5 past 10. Okay? So we can maybe just have a small sound, and everyone can stand, and we just be free. We don't need to be formal. Okay, so I'm not sure how far we're going to get, but at least I have to try to give you all 8 elements of the Eightfold Noble Path. Okay, so we have here right livelihood. So the R is, maybe that wasn't clear, it just means right. So there's the idea that there is right mindfulness, maybe goes this way, and wrong mindfulness, which goes that way. So wrong mindfulness would be the attention that a bank robber maybe pays whilst they're trying to crack the safe. They're very mindful, but it's possibly a little unethical. Although everybody likes a good heist movie, right? But so there's right diligence, the kinds of things that we were talking about, and there's wrong diligence. There's things that we can concentrate on that bring us in the direction of freedom, and things that we can concentrate on that don't. So this is kind of like a compass that we're building, a moral compass. So here we have right livelihood. So the Buddha wasn't just thinking about monks. This was a teaching that was also offered to lay people who have to make a living. And so we are invited to look at our livelihood, to see if it is bringing us in the direction of well-being or of suffering. Whether it is productive of more suffering for others in the world, whether it is tapping into or supporting systems of exploitation and so on, or whether it is going in a different direction. In general, I think we can ask ourselves questions about our purpose, our aspiration, our volition, what it is that we want, and who do we want it for. I know that if I look at my education, the education that I received, I can say that by and large I was trained to be an individualist. I was trained to compete. I was trained to try to be the best at whatever I did. Every exam I took alone, so I was more or less explicitly in competition with everyone. And so those habits are very deep in me, so I need to unlearn all of those things, because I don't want to contribute to a world of more selfishness and individualism and competition. I believe, although I have believed in the past that story of what we are as human beings, so that's the story I got from, it's not really modern genetic theory, but it was sort of current in the 80s or 90s. It's kind of Richard Dawkins' selfish gene or so on. That ultimately we are biological machines which only really have one purpose, one aspiration, one volition, which is to make copies of themselves, right? Which is to reproduce. So we are, in that, according to that story of what a human being is, we are just meat suits. We're just vehicles to carry these genes which just want to replicate themselves into the future, purposelessly, meaninglessly, like some vast, pointless clockwork. Fortunately, I think that's not true. That's completely wrong, and we know enough about ourselves to know that we are not only competitive, selfish. We also have within us the capacity to collaborate, to care for each other, to sacrifice even ourselves for one another. So I try to ask myself, what is the quality of my volition and my aspiration, and what do I want to do, what I want to do for, and who do I want to do it for? And what I notice is that when I, out of habit, want things for myself, I tend to end up suffering more. And when I cultivate within me the wish for the well-being of others, that tends to lead to my own well-being. I tend to feel more light and more free. That's a way to free myself from my own self-judgment and self-criticism as well. So for example, I give a very concrete example. If I play the cello, I've been trained to compete and to be extremely self-critical, and to basically always think, it's not good enough, I didn't practice enough, I didn't practice my scales, I should have worked harder, I'm not good enough, I played that out of tune, that was terrible, oh, what a disaster, everyone will think I'm terrible, and endless spiral of shame, and it's awful. So if I start out playing the cello thinking, I'm going to try and impress everyone and try to play something really good, and people will like me and think I'm great, I will suffer. I have proved that to myself many times. Whereas if I cultivate within myself the awareness that the people around me probably don't care, you know, how well I play or don't play, they're probably happy just to hear something, anything. And actually, their inner world becomes more important than my own. What I wish for is that the people around me should, for a moment, be able to touch peace, touch rest, touch healing. And if I put all of my energy into that aspiration, that volition, I'm freed. I might still play out of tune, it doesn't matter. I know why I'm doing it, I free myself from my own self-destructive thinking. There is a thing in the world right now which is very popular, it's the law of attraction, right? The secret, manifest your reality and so on. I don't know if it's true or not. I think it might be. But what I want to investigate is, if this is true, then let us examine the state of our present moment globally and ask ourselves, is this really what we wanted? Is this what we wanted to manifest? This is the fruit of our actions. This is the fruit of our way of thinking, of our way of being, this present moment, collectively. And most of these courses that I see online, right, learn the law of attraction, the secret of manifesting, or that, they seem to be still based on individualistic dreams. You know, manifest wealth, right? Because that's a good thing. Having more stuff, more money, definitely great. It's worked so far, right? Manifest wealth, manifest your dream home, your dream partner, your dream lifestyle, you know, wherever that might be, and post about it a lot on social media. So I'm just wondering, like, are we manifesting the right kinds of things? And I think in this gathering, there is a strength and a power of aspiration, not for ourselves, but for others. And that power of manifesting is very strong. And it may be even stronger if we focus it on the wish to relieve the suffering of others and of the world. So I think we can always test our aspiration, our volition. Is it for myself or is it for others? We could say much more about that, but I'm going to move on. On this side of the circle, we have right thinking, right speech, and right action. So these together are the what we call the triple karma. Karma just means action. And because we're a little bit analytical, we notice that our action has three strands. Thinking is a kind of action, right? The quality of our thinking changes the nature of reality, changes the nature of it certainly is the ground of what we might say, right? If we cultivate thoughts of anger and blame and hatred, then probably when we speak, that our speech will reflect the quality of our thinking, and our action, bodily action. So whatever we do in the world, it comes in one of these three flavors or some combination of them. And this is where maybe we can come back to this idea of the historical and the ultimate dimensions. So I don't know if you remember, yesterday morning we had this beautiful contemplation of which we call the 5 remembrances. You know, I'm of the nature to grow old, I am the nature to get sick, I'm of the nature to die, I'm of the nature to be separated from all those that I love and cherish. And my actions of body, speech and mind, right? Body, speech and mind are the ground on which I stand. They are my continuation. So what you have there is a very beautiful teaching which bridges the historical and the ultimate. So in the historical dimension, I will grow old. I will get sick. I will die. I will be separated from all those I love and cherish. Cannot escape any of those things. That is the historical truth. The 5th remembrance, that I am continued by my actions, starts to pass from the historical to the ultimate truth. There is a sense in which our actions, what we think, what we say and what we do, resonate always. They don't stop with us. If you think about yourself as being at the center of a kind of wavefront, a sphere expanding of all your actions in the past, think about where your words have gone, who your thoughts have touched, and your actions. Where are those actions now in the world? They're everywhere, resonating in countless places and in countless ways. And so knowing that, we want to be very careful about the quality of our actions of thinking, speech, and our bodily actions. That we want to have a beautiful continuation. So our teacher offered us this beautiful image of a candle. And maybe it's melted a little bit. And if you think about the light of the candle going out into the world, this is like our actions radiating out. And this light, it doesn't stop. And our actions are also, the candle is self-illuminating, right? Its light lights up the candle itself. So, in this sense, we can also start to transcend the notion of our separate self. The idea that I am this body. Right? Because it's this body which is subject to old age, to sickness, and to death. But my actions are not. My actions continue me always, and they are also me. They are also my body. They carry my signature. So, this can also free us from partly the sense that I have to do it in my lifetime. I am responsible, I have to solve this myself. We are just part of a long chain of inheritance, of actions. We have been touched and inspired by the actions of love, of trust, of generosity, of compassion and kindness of our ancestors, of our teachers. And we continue that chain of transmission. And so we start to be able to look into the question of ends and means. It is very common in the way that certainly I've been educated, to be encouraged almost to sacrifice the means of doing things for the ends. I am willing to sacrifice my health, to sacrifice my relationships, if I can achieve that end which I believe is so important. I will sacrifice pretty much anything. But my teacher has taught us never to sacrifice the means, because our actions carry the signature of our way of doing. If, in order to achieve some beautiful end, we sacrifice the quality of our action, we give in to using violence or anger, even mental violence, those actions will carry that signature. And so, because those actions radiate eternally, if we want to have a collaborative future, we have to collaborate now. If we want to have a non-toxic future, we have to be non-toxic now, to ourselves and to each other. If we want to have an equitable future, we have to use our actions of body, speech and mind have to embody the principles of equity now. So in fact, we learn to see the ends in the present moment. Our way of taking this step already embraces the destination. So we can potentially touch a measure of peace in this way, as long as we know that we have acted in the most beautiful way that we are able to in the present moment. We can have peace. We have done everything that we can, and we are liberated from the idea that our own well-being is dependent on achieving some future outcome. And that may be very important as the situation potentially worsens. We cannot make our own well-being dependent on an outcome. We have to own and embody our well-being now, and that is already the outcome. So all of this can be summed up with the phrase, which I think we used as the title of this retreat, which is "The way out is in." And it's on every one of your cushions, beautifully embroidered. So we want to embody the change that we want to see in every moment. And this affects our colleagues, right? Our way of being. We don't try to fix them or to change them, but if they see that we have been able to transform, that is already an invitation for them to get curious. We talked a little bit about this already yesterday. So I'm going to move on, because there's one part here which is missing. So in a sense, all of this practice can be understood as being aimed at generating what we call right view, also right insight. So, and right view is at the foundation of all of our actions. So every aspect of the path interacts with every other aspect. It's not a linear sequence. It's not this, then that, then this, then that. You can start anywhere, and every part supports every other part. We talk about the triple training, which is this part. This is the triple karma, and here we have the triple training, which is mindfulness, M, concentration, insight. Okay, this is right view or right insight. So when we cultivate mindfulness deeply, it becomes concentrated, and insight arises spontaneously. But let's look a little bit at how to characterize this, what we call right view. Because this is what we don't hear about in the corporate mindfulness world. But it's, for us, the most important aspect. There are many ways that we can approach this. What does this have to do with systems change? We have to see that our present circumstance, our present situation, is the product of our way of acting, certainly, collectively, and our way of acting is the product of our way of thinking and our way of seeing. Right? Our way of seeing what we are, what a human being is, and what the world is, our idea of nature. Right? If we have the idea that nature is there for our use, then that results in a certain kind of civilization. Right? If we have the idea that we are separate selves, each responsible for our own well-being and ultimately in competition with each other, or nature red in tooth and claw, that it's just a fight for survival, those ideas, to me, are productive of a way of being, a certain kind of civilization which is rapacious, extractive, violent, and so on. What we see now in the world. So if we want to transform that, we need to transform our way of thinking, our way of seeing, including our way of seeing ourselves, of what we are. And as I said before, part of this is dissolving this idea of separation. So every single practice that you've encountered in this retreat can be understood as helping us to do that. When we choose to eat in silence, the invitation is to contemplate our food deeply, to look at it in the light of interbeing. Right? To see that it is not, that nothing is a separate entity. We are retraining our eyes and our mind. Okay, so it's nothing about this practice is trivial. Nothing is just a sort of well-being trick, right? Everything goes all the way down to cultivating this aspect of right view. So this goes all the way to the model of mind that we shared with you, the idea of store consciousness, of manas, of mind consciousness, and so on. And there is a technical term which was introduced, which is a mental formation. And the term formation in Buddhism is very, very important because it encodes a certain understanding of reality, that nothing is a separate self-entity, that we can start to train ourselves to see everything as a formation, as a coming together of many causes and conditions. So, kind of run out of room here. Okay, over here. So this is, we're looking at right view now, and the cultivation of this right view. What we observe is that our view, our way of seeing, can be deluded or enlightened. If our view is obscured or deluded, we have a tendency to see things as things, actually. We see separate things. And language really helps us to do this. Right? The fact that we can name something is constantly tricking us into thinking that it exists. So based on the idea of a separate thing, we actually generate the notion, the category of existence and non-existence. Or being and non-being. These come as a pair. So a lot of philosophy starts from existence or being. But in fact, being is something that we made up based on the idea of things, of separate things. Right? When you identify something with a name, let's say an apple, and you look at it and you say that's an apple, it forms the illusion in our mind that there is such a thing as an apple which can exist on its own, independently. It can exist. It can be. Right? We ascribe to it being. This apple is. It exists. If the apple exists, then at some point it had to come into existence. It had to be born. And if it's born, it will die. So the notions of birth and death are fundamentally dependent on the notions of being and non-being. Something can either be or not be, to be or not to be. This is the question. I think, therefore, I am, I exist. Right? But we are moving out of that paradigm. We are moving towards the paradigm of interbeing, of interdependence, where we know that to be is to interbe. There is no separate being. Nothing exists independently of anything else. But as long as we think in these terms of being and non-being, of birth and death, we are in the world of samsara. We suffer because the things that we love, we want them to last forever. The things that we dislike, we want them to cease to exist or to be taken away from us. And it goes on and on. But there is an alternate pathway here. If we see not things but formations, and this is a training, we have to retrain our senses, our consciousness, at a very, very deep level, to see everything in terms of its causes and conditions, to see everything as being a coming together of the entire cosmos. We see everything in terms of its relationships. And this is a kind of a way of seeing which embodies already reciprocity and reverence. We see our interdependence, and so we cannot be indifferent to anything, because we're connected to everything. We start to switch our view from prioritizing things to prioritizing relations. So not the relata, the things that are related, but the relationships. We see that, in fact, what is happening right now? It seems like I'm here, you're there, we're separate. Based on our separate existence, there is a relationship which emerges between us. No. We have to learn to see that again. What is happening is that out of the interaction of our consciousnesses, we appear. Out of the relationship, we come along with our sword of separation, a mental cutting, and say, I and you, self and other. But that is something that we impose on reality. It's not real. What's real is this constant arising of this unbroken whole. We impose on that afterward the categories of subject and object of perception, of self and other. We cut everything into little pieces with the sword of discrimination in our mind, which is a kind of violence, a very profound violence, which I believe is at the root of a lot of the violence of our society, this idea of separation. So if we want to undermine this, if we want to be part of the birth of this new paradigm, this new way of seeing, we have to go right to the root. We have to find out what is at the root of this notion of separation. So we are offered this term, formation. It's still a word, right? It's just another word, but maybe it's a little bit more helpful than the notion of self or thing. So you're invited, when you contemplate a leaf of lettuce, to see not a separate entity, but a coming together of many causes and conditions. You're invited, when you see another human being, to see not just them, but to see their parents, to see their ancestors, to see their culture, to see all of the many causes and conditions, including their suffering, including their aspiration, their joy, that have come together to make them who they are. This is truly a new way of seeing. And when we see in this way, we are freed from the notion of being and the notion of non-being. Instead, we see that to be is to interbe. There is no separate being. And in the light of interbeing, there is no birth, and no death. And we are free to dwell in nirvana as opposed to samsara. And it all starts with this retraining of our seeing, not seeing in terms of separation. So this is a lot to take on board in a few minutes, but I give you one more example. We know that there is urgency in the historical dimension. As Christian is fond of saying, everything has a ticking clock in it, has an alarm clock in it. The rising temperature, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the slowing of the North Atlantic, what is it, the AMOC, the melting of the ice and so on. All of these things have ticking clocks. The loss of biodiversity, the loss of topsoil, the loss of fresh drinking water, and so on. And this urgency can make us feel powerless, and it can make us feel a sense of panic sometimes. And the way of seeing that I was trained in my education tells me that this is real. This is the reality. The material and the real. The temporal. The worldly. The individual. And in this world, we have also utilitarianism. And the idea that sometimes the ends do justify the means. Right? That we have to do whatever we need to do to achieve the ends. And in this teaching we are offered, instead of this sense of urgency, a sense of freedom. The ultimate dimension. The spiritual. And maybe, according to a normal way of understanding, the imaginary, as opposed to the real. The eternal, as opposed to the temporal. The sacred, as opposed to the worldly. The collective, as opposed to the individual. And in ethical terms, maybe we just call it deep ethics, in which we cannot sacrifice means for ends. That can be non-consequentialist ethics or deontological ethics. Here we also have the measurable, the identifiable, everything that can be quantified, the quantifiable, and on the other side maybe what cannot be said, the mysterious, the non-measurable, the non-conceptual, the non-quantifiable. And what's interesting about these two aspects of truth is that in my education, I was told that these are all real, right? And these are not real. They are fake, illusory. So this type of truth may have the tendency to exclude this type of truth. It excludes. But what's fascinating to me is that these truths include the other kinds of truths. They don't exclude. So in the spiritual, we can embrace the worldly, the temporal. In the ultimate, we see the historical. In fact, to touch the ultimate, we just have to go deep enough into the historical. When you look into your piece of lettuce and you see the sunshine, that's a historical truth, right? That the sunshine has caused the lettuce to grow. But if you go into that deep enough as a contemplation, you touch the ultimate. So where do you find the ultimate? In the historical. So we don't want to suggest that this is the only truth. The ultimate truth does not deny the historical truth. The sense of freedom that we are inviting you to touch does not deny the urgency. We're not saying that that urgency is not real. What we're saying is that if we can act in the historical dimension with the freedom of the ultimate dimension, then our way of acting will be different, and the kind of world we will bring about will be different. Otherwise, if we only rely on these methods and this way of seeing, we will produce more of the destruction and the chaos that we have already seen, that we are living in. So if we are truly committed to bringing about a different kind of world, we have to be able to live and act in the historical with the freedom of the ultimate. We have to know that even though the situation is desperate, I can touch freedom in this step. I can touch healing and peace in this breath. And that transforms the quality of the action that I engage in. This is not spiritual bypassing, right? This is not saying, oh, we just take refuge in the ultimate and forget about everything else, just sit on a cushion for the rest of your life and breathe and smile. No, this is engaged Buddhism. It means we act in the world and we commit to resisting injustice, but we do it in a different way. We do it without this conceptual violence of separating, of carving up reality into little pieces. So when we came to Bali, we had, some of us had a few days here before the retreat began, and it's very humbling and beautiful to be in a country where the spiritual practices are still alive. I would walk about half an hour every day down to the beach and back, and in every little driveway there were little offerings being made regularly every single day. And here as well, you may have noticed that all around the resort, little offerings are made every day. And before the retreat, we were also invited to participate in this practice, to ask permission to be here, to ask permission of the land, of the river, and of the ocean, to be here and to hold this retreat. The West has been fascinated by the Bali water temple system. It's been studied scientifically because obviously if you're only interested in utility, then producing more rice is very interesting, right? And we know that the Bali water temple is very productive. It manages to have higher rates of production of rice than other systems. And so the Western scientists come and look at it and they go, oh look, they're making little offerings, how nice. That can't be materially effective because that's not real, right? The water is just H2O, it's indifferent, non-sentient, inanimate matter. But you should keep doing what you're doing because you're making more rice. Right? So there is, in the analysis, already the assumption of what is real and what is not real. The hidden assumption that scientific materialism is the truth embodies within it an incredible amount of violence and a denial of the possibility of any other kind of reality. So you can come and look at the productivity of the Bali water temple system and analyze it on a purely material basis, and you may find something about how the water is managed. But if you already assume that the offerings, that the nature of the relationship with the water, that the attitude of reverence and reciprocity has no effect, is not real, then you may completely miss the point. So, for many of you, this knowledge, this implicit knowledge, may be much closer to you than it was for me. I had to dig a long way back in my ancestry. I mean, ultimately, I think we were all animists at one point or other. We all knew, every society knew that everything is alive, and that we are constantly in a relationship of reciprocity and reverence with everything. But for some of us, that knowledge is quite far back. We have to go digging a little further. And for some of us, we've grown up with that knowledge, still alive, still practiced. And we have this opportunity to breathe life back into ourselves, into our relationships, into our way of seeing. We have to decolonize ourselves from this mechanistic way of understanding the world, seeing it as a dead mechanism, eternally running down according to physical law. For me, that view of reality is fundamental to our seeming indifference to suffering, to the suffering of other people and of the world. So everything that we offered in this retreat is also giving us a way to bypass this rational mind with the sword of discrimination that comes and separates everything with language into little bits. Self and other, and I'm here and you're there, we're not the same, we're different. We bypass the sword of discrimination of our mind, and we get back in touch with the feeling, sensing, reciprocal, reverberant part of our being. Our body knows these truths already. It is already resonating and living and dwelling in the insight of interbeing. And everything that we've done and everything that we're doing is an invitation to come back to that wisdom that we all have already. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. But I wanted to hopefully paint a little bit to offer you the realization that what can appear sometimes as just breathe and smile is in fact a practice which invites us all the way down to uprooting these destructive mechanistic ways of thinking. So all of the little bits and pieces of practices that you can take home with you, remember not to underestimate them, not to trivialize them, not to say, oh, that's just, breathing in, breathing out. This is what happens. We've seen it. Some people come to Plum Village and they say, oh yeah, but you just say breathe. Breathe and smile. Like, yes, that is what we say. Have you done it? Have you really done it? Because if you do, this is where you end up. Free. Oh, would you like to sing a song? Yes? Take a break? Well, we could do it tonight. Now? We need a song. We may need a song. Huh? Tonight. Okay, let's take a vote. Also tonight. Maybe this is the practice. Okay. Put your hand up if you would like to sing a song now. Okay. That's good. And you're free. If you want to take a break, you can take a break. So this is a little song in 3-part harmony. But it's very simple. Okay, so the words are: we are one. Okay. What is it? One with the earth. One with grief. One with joy. Okay? So the top line goes like this. We are one. Am I in the right key? Yes. One with the earth. One with grief. One with joy. Okay. One moment, please. Let me write that down. We are one. One with the earth. I know. It looks complicated, but it's not. One with grief. One with joy. Even if you think you can't read music, you actually can. Okay? So when it goes up, you go up. When it goes down, you go down. Okay? It's that simple. One more time, just the melody. 3, 4. We are one, one with the earth, one with grief, one with joy. See, you can read music. Easy. Okay. Second part. Maybe let's do the low part first, okay? We'll do the low part. How are you going to distinguish these? I need different colors. Have you got colors? Yes. Okay, so some of you are going to sing the red line. And it goes like this. La la la. Maybe I'll put it here. Yeah, okay. We are one. Easy. All the same. One with the earth. One with grief. One with joy. Okay, we go down there. Okay, let's try that, just the low part. We are one, Those two parts together. Oh, yes, thank you so much. Perfect. Can we have some violin? Oh, it's not far. By the time they've learned the third part. Okay, let's sing the first part and the second part together. So let's say everyone on this side, from here, top. We are one. And then everyone over here singing the bottom. We are one. Okay? Got it? Okay, 3, 4. We are one with the earth. You guys are good. One with grief, one with joy. One more time. We are one with the earth, one with grief, one with joy. You guys are pros. Okay, no problem. Third part. Actually, the third part is the highest part. So we put it up here. We are one with... Oh no, sorry. What am I doing? Yeah, one. We are one with... Doesn't go down, stays on the same note. One with the earth. Then it goes down. And then it's the same. Easy. One with grief. And it's the same again. One with joy. So there's actually only 2 notes. We are one with the earth. Then same note all the way to the end. One with, same note, grief, same note still. One with joy. It's actually the easiest part, okay? Who wants to do the top? Maybe middle, okay? Everyone between the pillars. If you're between the pillars, you're on the top voice, okay? We are one with the earth, and then same note all the way to the end. One with grief, one with joy. Okay, now with the melody. We are one at the bottom, one with the earth, one with grief, same note, one with joy. Okay, let's hear the melody, a bit more confident. We are one with the earth, one with grief, one